I think the key point is that the African economy already shows resilience and moderate growth, and with further steps can become the fast-growing region of the world, and should be, because Africa starts with a lower starting point of per capita income, technology deployment, and so forth. So the room for rapid growth is very, very high. In essence, for me, what China achieved during the 40 years from 1980 to 2020 is what Africa can and will achieve from 2023 to 2063. That means aiming for growth, as President Adesina said, of at least 7 to 10% per year. This is reasonable, it's feasible, and I believe utterly achievable. I think that there are 6 crucial steps from where Africa is today to where Africa can be in this period of robust growth. First, continuing to strengthen the single market in Africa is the single most important step. By the time the imperial age ended in Africa, Africa had been divided into 54 countries. But Africa's the same size population as India and China, each one country with a large market. If Africa replicates the performance of India and China, Africa will achieve the same high results. And it's notable, by the way, that while India lags China in economic growth, it is now in a position of a very rapid period of growth. And so India is showing that the same phenomenon, 1.4 billion people with a unified, sensible economic structure, delivers growth of 7 to 10% per year. Africa surely can do the same. The African Union is the key to this. And this is already well underway with important initiatives in the last few years. And I think more to come. We heard on payment systems, settlements, transboundary infrastructure are all key. But building a single market, Africa will be one of the 3 giant regions of the world. And it will become the largest population in the world, of course. And as a unified place, it will become a center of the global economy very dynamically, in my view. Second is building critical infrastructure. And that means especially power, fiber, rail, roads, and ports. There's a big agenda for infrastructure. It cannot be delayed. It should not be based on what is currently available in national budgets, because that's not enough. It should be financed, and I'm going to come to that. But Africa needs, in the next years, in this decade, to close the infrastructure gaps, which are enormous, but achievable to close, because there's no deep mystery on issues of power or fiber or other basic infrastructure needed for rapid economic development. The third critical area is human skills. That's the major capital stock of any economy. And because of digital technologies now, it is possible, if we really strategize well and deploy well, to have the most rapid upgrading of human skills in history in Africa in the coming 10 or 15 years. Everybody can have access to quality information, to online education, to new kinds of certification and degree training. You could have a continent of universal access to higher education at very low cost, which wasn't imaginable 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that this is incredibly exciting. As a professor now for 43 years, I want to work on that. I said to my university, I'll say an inside story, just privately among us, at one point, that it would be possible to deliver online master's degrees in Africa at $1,000 or $2,000 maximum per year. And I was told, well, it doesn't quite fit the business model of my university, but you know what? It fits the business model of Africa. And so this is something that could be a phenomenal breakthrough. People want skills, and all they need is a handheld device right now and some organization from us in the academic side to make a revolution of education faster than ever before, and free or nearly free for people. By the way, yesterday, just as we were in Kenya in a remote, incredibly impoverished village, just basically nothing, and suffering drought. So it was the bottom, really the bottom. I've seen a lot of villages. This is the bottom. Still, there were phones, there was phone service, and my wife asked, where do you charge your phone? And they showed us the solar panel sitting on the thatched roof that was the phone charger. So it's really possible to reach everybody. Of course, a phone won't do it. They need a $50 device or a $100 device. Then the children there could be getting an education every day rather than the school that is 3 hours walk away from where this village was. This was impoverished, but if you think about it, healthcare, education, payment services, all absolutely achievable on some wireless broadband with a cheap device. And so this is the third point, is a skills revolution, not to wait 20 years or 40 years, but now. And we heard from the Minister of Zambia, keeping kids in school is expensive, but there is no higher return investment in society than that. So we have to solve that problem. Fourth, critical sectors. Clearly, the African economies have several key critical sectors for investment. I would say agriculture is absolutely clearly one. And as President Adesina always emphasizes, without question, Africa could feed itself as a continent and feed a lot of the rest of the world as well. But it requires investment, especially in water, because Africa's 95% rain-fed still. And Africa irrigation changes everything, but it's expensive. So there's a financing issue, but it's a financing issue that is necessary. Critical minerals is the second area where we know that this continent has the minerals needed for global sustainable development. And yet they're basically ripped off until today by outside forces. And this is where smart management, proper taxation, proper guidance to collect the returns on these minerals is essential. It's a tragedy. I know it firsthand. Countries are getting ripped off by the Swiss, by the Chinese, by the Americans, by everybody for critical minerals like cobalt that are central for the world economy, happen to be in Africa, but not to be plundered. And Pope Francis said it very well when he was in the DRC last week. First, let Africa breathe. And second, Africa's not here for your taking and plunder. And so this is a really basic point, is the critical sectors. The fifth area that I believe is key to all of this is finance. Because basically, the most fundamental problem in the international system is that the poor pay usurious rates and the rich are able to finance nearly for free. And so if you look at what Europe or the United States pays for a 30-year sovereign bond, maybe 3% interest. Try that for an African country right now. Ghana, for example, which is in debt distress, 13%, 15%. Or, sorry, you don't qualify for any funding. We don't even roll over existing debts. This finance question is completely based on false economic premises. The rating agency systems are, in my view, absolutely wrong and self-fulfilling in what they do. The IMF, World Bank, debt sustainability analysis is terrible. And it's a shame for me because many of them are my students and they didn't learn what they did in my class. Because in my class, I taught how investment has a high return, much higher than the cost of capital. And so you borrow to finance your infrastructure. You don't sit without electricity. You electrify based on finance. But the IMF has a different idea. We don't want you to bother us. We don't want you to get into trouble. So sit without electricity. This is not right. So this finance question is central. And I can tell you, it can be won intellectually without question. I know it because, first of all, they do it wrong. The rating agency team said to me, Mr. Sachs, we don't know anything about development economics. We just make predictions about default events in 3 months or 6 months. I say, yes, but you cause many of them. You downgrade a country, then it can't roll over its credits, then it defaults. It says, yes, but our problem is we forecast. But the IMF should know better. The IMF should have a debt sustainability analysis based on long-term growth. Africa is not overly indebted. Africa is under indebted. Why? Because no one lends to Africa. Why not? Well, because the IMF says, don't take on any loans. Or if you reach 30% of GDP, that's too dangerous, or 50% of GDP, that's too dangerous. This is completely wrong. Completely analytically wrong. I'd much rather be at 200% of GDP debt with electricity, fiber, and all the kids in school. Because then the growth is going to be 10% per year for a generation. When you grow at 10% per year, you are doubling every 7 years. And you do that even for 21 years, that's an 8-fold increase in the size of the economy. And what looks like unpayable debt is not any problem at all. But the financing has to be long-term. Don't borrow for 3 years for a 40-year development project, because that's guaranteed to lead to crisis. We need Africa to be financed on a large scale for long-term at the same terms as the rich countries, period. And I believe we're going to get there.
And on that note,
just if I could just finish two final thoughts. I'm sorry to go on, but 2 final quick thoughts. First, the African Development Bank is the key institution for making this breakthrough. Currently, the AFDB finances, as I understand it, around 12 billion a year. It should be about 100 billion a year. I want to put that on the table, because that will be the breakthrough for Africa to be one of the centers of the world economy. At least 100 billion a year lending by this extremely important institution. That's number one. Last point is the African Union absolutely needs to become the 21st member of the G21, because, and not as I was recently told, as an permanent observer. That's nonsense. Africa's not an observer, it is a protagonist. So we need the African Union at the G21. And I'm on my way to India. I'll be meeting with Indian leadership. They have the presidency this year. They'll get it. This will be a huge diplomatic breakthrough. Thank you very much.